Chair Rocha,
Here.
Vice Chair Kennedy. Here. Mike Fan,
Present.
Randy Goodman,
Here.
Luther Kraxberger,
Present.
Anthony Teeters,
Here.
and then Arnold Urias let us know he wasn't going to be here today. I do also want to let you guys know at some point we have a company that's going to come in, hopefully very quickly and quietly, and just switch out the pictures in here. Please ignore them. Sorry, it's double booking.
Please ignore them. Oh, yeah, that's right. All right, thank you. All right, so we'll go to item 3A, discussion and action items. Approval of minutes from the July 3rd, 2024 and August 7th, 2024 Workforce Housing Committee meetings. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Okay. Call motion. We have a second?
Second.
I think Tony got that one
I think so.
ahead
yeah.
of Luther. All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, so minutes are approved unanimously. And then we'll go to a discussion action item 3B, presentation and discussion regarding member Goodman's proposed workforce housing project. And Amber, you have something on that?
I do. So a couple things to keep in mind, and we have legal here to go into more detail if needed. As we talk about this project, keep things in mind that you want to see in a workforce housing policy as we tear this apart in the nicest way possible. It's going to give us ideas of what we can put into a policy to address things across the board. So keep that in mind, jot things down, send me things, and we're going to talk about that more in detail, but just keep that policy in your mind when we're talking about this too. And then talking with legal, with this project, it's a concept project right now, but anybody who plans or if anybody might potentially have the interest to use this project in the future, cannot be part of the conversation. I think that's a decent way to say that. So if, I know we have a lot of builders and developers and things like that, that if you see this and you're like, this is a great idea, I would love to do this with my company, it would be a conflict of interest. So at this point, if you want to do that, you can't be part of the conversation. Or in the future, if you're part of the conversation, just know that these are off the table for the committee to use in the future.
The properties or the ideas?
The idea and the concept, but I don't know. What are your thoughts about the property? Probably not because it's a theoretical.
I don't need the property.
Thoughts?
Thanks. I missed the question.
What, just the ideas that we're talking
No,
about
I know
are
we're
off
talking
the
about.
table? Is that my understanding if you're going to move?
I think if anyone has a future interest in working on the property, and that comes with the ability to make or lose profit or make or lose a position, it's kind of this pecuniary proprietary interest, then they should declare a conflict of interest, leave the room. And in some future point they want to bid on it, then they can because they declare their conflict. If they don't declare a conflict, even though at this point it's kind of this illustrative concept to say, here's kind of the reality of what developers who may be interested in doing workforce housing face here, it could present a conflict in the future if somebody on the committee or their company wants to kind of bid on this particular property. So I think it goes to the property and it goes to the general concept of putting workforce housing on the property if you stand to make or lose money on it.
Gotcha. So it is more property specific.
Yeah, I think so.
Like I do plan to build more houses.
Okay.
All right, anything else on that?
Nope.
All right, just to piggyback up real quick what Amber mentioned about the policy, we are going to discuss that later on the workforce housing policy. As a committee, that's one of the strategic goals that I think was like number 4 on the priorities list. But all we're really trying to do is like almost think of it as having like a mental notepad on the side that as we run into things like water, permit fees, you know, like Gwen, who was here last meeting, gave us some ideas of like, well, we can't waive or get rid of the impact fees, but there's a way to be able to waive and reduce like drastically engineering fees, inspection fees, water meter fees, all that stuff. Just as a committee, if we're aware of those things, just let us like Amber know, and say, hey, let's earmark that for the for the workforce housing policy. Because as we discuss later on, we're trying to just come up with some idea of a timeline for when we're going to actually start putting some pen to paper on that policy and what that looks like. So, I mean, is that fair? That's kind of
Yeah, if you send me any thoughts, that way I can keep a running list and then we can use that to hopefully bring you guys a draft and we'll talk about that further later.
Oh, Connie, yeah.
Actually, John, let's talk back about the impact fees. You could potentially come to council and ask for the council to absorb, pay for the impact fees as a part of a plan, and the council can decide whether or not they do it. So those are not absolved. They do have to be paid, and they would ultimately be paid by the taxpayer. But it could be, you could ask for that, and the council, if they felt like it was a good enough project, could choose to do that.
Thanks.
Are we going to discuss this, or are you going to move on?
Nope, we're discussing it.
Okay,
That's what we're on right now is 3B.
okay.
So if you want to take it away from here, Randy,
Well, yeah, I do.
you got it.
First of all, I'm not dying to do this. I'd rather stay on the committee than to do this. But we have to figure out a way to attract a builder to do it. Right now, it's a loser. It's about $200,000 loser. We've got to figure out a way to attract a developer that would want to do this. And it can't just be all civic minded, I don't think. I mean, business is business. Sandy had reached out and she wanted me to present to some builders, potential developers for this project. But before I did that, I wanted to kind of get a consensus from everybody here as to how we're going to pitch it. And like I said, the big problem, and that's on the last page, is that you're $198,000 short of making this even come close to penciling. And so what I was hoping that would happen today is that we could discuss two things. One is, how could we make up that shortfall? Is there a way? And secondly, what will be the attraction to bring a developer in? In other words, if we make up the $200,000 shortfall, the 198, whatever it is, there's still no profit in this project for 10 years, the way I proposed it for the developer. They're not making any money on building it, and they're not making any money on renting it. And if they have a vacancy, then they're really in trouble, because now they're going negative immediately, okay? One of my thoughts was, if this is a city-owned piece of property and they're a note trustee holder on it, can we make it exclusive for city employees? Can department heads use it as a recruiting tool to attract new police officers, firemen, whatever, they have a place to live? And then, is it possible that the city actually leases the building from the developer? Because now the city is responsible to make the monthly rent payment to the developer, basically guaranteeing the rent payment. And then they can cycle people in and out of the project as they see fit. I mentioned that in here about the department heads being responsible for who kind of lives there. And I don't know if the department heads want to take that on or not. I don't know. They say they want the recruiting tool. So this is potentially an avenue to give them the recruiting tool, but how much are they willing to do? I don't think that I can attract a developer, and Sandy can chime in. If the developer is doing all these things with no guarantees at all, and he's operating on a zero margin, I don't see how you attract somebody to that. So there's the problems. There's a bunch of smart minds in here. Let's toss it around. That's pretty quiet. Go ahead, Connie.
Go ahead, Connie.
It is actually being done. And Amber, what happened to Gorman? I thought they were going to be on the,
So we do have a meeting with them with the chair and vice chair first.
okay,
So,
okay,
and I sent you the invitation as well.
okay.
And then once we talk to them, we'll
Who is it?
decide.
So there's a company, there's one of many, but one of the companies in the western United States that's been able to harness this animal, if you will, is a company called Goodman. And remember, I've kind of spoken about this in the past, that their model of how they actually make money, because remember, you just said it, the building costs are what they are, the labor costs are what they are. The land, potentially we could get some kind of a thing with the city, so that's, a small contribution really in the overall picture. But the way that they've been able to make the profit is through the granting, the federal government grants, there's grants through ADOT, there's all kinds of different companies. They have a person, and I think a department, and we'll hear from her when she comes here to speak to us, that does nothing but that all day long. That's their profit margin, is what they get through, the federal government grants and all the other grants that are available. There are many, especially right now, because this is not just a problem in Prescott. As we know, this is a problem throughout the country, and especially in this, regime, if you will, there's been a lot more money spilling out for workforce housing, and I do think it's going to continue because it is a big problem. But the profit is going to come from places like that, unfortunately, and that's a vital part of that when you get a big percentage of it covered. And so I think they're going to talk about that model when they come here. We're going to have to tap into that. There's a lot of strings attached to the money, as we know from what just happened with the 200,000. The government doesn't give it out free. There's going to be a lot of things you're going to have to do to be able to comply to get the money, but they've been able to harness that, and we need to listen to what they have to say, because we can be a mini version of that if somebody wants to step up here in the city that has a functioning construction company. Because all the other stuff falls under construction. It's how are we going to get the profit? You said it right. They're not going to do it for free. So that is the avenue that's open for the profit. It may be a reduced profit, but nonetheless, it's a way to make some money. So,
Well, then the question becomes, do we want to put together some kind of design package using the floor plans I already currently have, and I got permission to use them for free, and then we hand it to that developer and say, here you go. This is what we can build. We've already reviewed it, no more, no less. Here's a potential floor plan, or are we sticking our, so we don't want to do that then?
it's part of the model.
Okay.
No, in fact, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, and as a commission, this is all good, and I think this is an eye-opener for people that aren't in the business, because the numbers are what they are and they don't lie, right? I think as a commission, for right now anyway, why don't we look at some of the stuff that we can do? We've talked about defining what the city can do. We've talked about the ADUs, the home of your own program. As a recommending body that you are, I think you need to kind of prioritize what you can do and start on that, because you've been impatient as I have been. We want to make some ground work here, but these are the things that we can do right now. So if I were you, I would try to direct the commission into getting those recommendations in front of the council. Okay? The home of your own, the ADUs, some of the zoning, the setbacks could be relaxed. I mean, take a deep dive into what can be done, because I think this model, it's coming to fruition that it's probably not something that we understand yet until we get the people that are doing it successfully in here. And that way we don't have to reinvent the mousetrap. They've got it down. So they're building one right now out in Tempe, I think she told me. So it'll be interesting to have her come and talk to everybody about it.
Yeah, Randy, I think the value of this and what we probably should focus on as a committee is, like, you took the time, which we appreciate a ton, is to get all this on paper and figure out, like, to me, I walk away with thinking it is going to be extremely difficult on a case-by-case basis, like per project, to see something work out with the numbers, right? But I don't think I want to get too bogged down as a committee to get into the specifics of that project, because all we're trying to do here is really just recommend to the city what things we can recommend changing within the city to allow for a more incentivized way to get there. Like, for example, I did the math at $1,400 per month. Our AMI range that we've defined here is from 60 to 120%. This is it sits at 74% of AMI. So there is some room there, right? Because technically we're saying as a committee, we can meet the needs of a 60% AMI to a 120% AMI. So if we're at 74% at this project, there is, of course, the lower we go, the better for a lot more people. But the reality is we're not going to be close to the bottom. We'll probably be more from the 75 to 100, right? So that's something encouraging. And we wouldn't have probably seen that unless you've taken the time to do it. Because for me now it says, okay, well, there is some room to go up from 74 of AMI to 100 of AMI, and this would still be considered a workforce housing project, right, from what the committee has defined. If you guys all got this already, if we can look into your notes or what things we can highlight here that we can, if at least start working towards putting into a policy, I think that would be the value of trying to break down this project that Randy has worked on. Because we can get bogged down with like, well, construction costs, right? Someone might come in and say, I can build it 10, 15 bucks a foot cheaper. It's like, well, I don't know. Can they?
I doubt it.
It's like, yeah, but that, so I don't like getting into the hardships of the project per se on those types of deals, I think is getting us kind of off track a little bit of what we have control of, right? You're looking at it with your developer builder hat. And I think that's really very valuable that you put it on paper, because now we go, well, gosh, how would Randy want to do this, right? Or how would any developer builder want to do this?
Well, that was the whole thing. How do we attract somebody to do it?
So one of my questions was, does your construction costs include hard and soft costs?
Mm-hmm.
So is that your permitting, your impact fees, your everything?
Well, it does and it doesn't. Some of the soft costs if I were to do the project, I was just going to absorb it as a write-off against my company. And that being design, engineering, that kind of thing. That's why I talked to those guys about getting that done at cost or at no fee at all. Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about as a committee. Let's back up for a second, guys, here. The whole reason I did this is I can see that I'd like to be involved as a committee member in creating a clear path for that first year employment. This is a house you can live in with your kids because it's 2-bedroom, 2-bath. It's not some little cracker box deal. And then the second phase of what I'd like to be involved in is creating a revenue stream to do down payment assistance. Because if you stay, let's talk in theory. If you stay here a year in these apartments, right? Your first year of employment, you get off probation, and now you're eligible for down payment assistance. And we've created a program where we can assist financially. So now the person goes into the down payment program with us. And it's a 5-year program. We forgive $10,000 a year, $50,000 total, loaned. So now they're a 6-year employee, first year probation, apartments, 5 years of ownership. The chances of them staying with us at the 6th year, I think anybody in the city will attest to this. I know in my city that I work, they're not leaving. They might, but they're not going to leave like they do in the first 1 to 3 year period. And that's where we're losing all this money on training and vetting and testing and medical exams and all that. We lose all that money when they leave. So if we can figure out a way to get them to stay here for those first 5 to 6 years, they're not leaving. They're vetted. And that was my whole goal in all this. So anyhow.
Definitely so you're thinking almost like a very, like a pretty detailed, almost like city managed program, if you will, right? Like it's not a self-sustained project where a developer just says, all right, here's the units. Take them. You're thinking more of sharing ideas, more of like the city saying, hey, well, there's like you get the fire department and the police department involved, and then you have this kind of like 6-year program or whatever, which to me, quite honestly, Randy, is a lot of work, right? And to me, that position that we want filled from someone that could be this full-time person would be the one formulating all this, right? Because I don't know how far we can get as a committee to do all that.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's in the weeds, right? It's a lot of detail. Sorry, Mike, you got.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that what this does, I think it does exemplify that no matter how you crunch the numbers, we're not going to get there without some supplement. A developer, a builder is not going to do it for free unless he is very philanthropic minded. So whether it's through philanthropy, through donations, through grants, this isn't going to, I don't think this is going to happen without supplemental income coming in. is the bottom line. What this shows is, in this case, $200,000 needs to be raised. Could the rest be borrowed and make a pro forma workout? Yeah, but at some point, outside dollars has to come in and supplement.
Yeah, I agree with what Mike said. And the problem is, I don't care if you're doing 6 units or 60. You got the same problem.
Yeah.
You're going to be short, you're going to be shortfall no matter what. So when we started our committee, we had this flowery idea that we were going to get in here and be able to do these things. And I hate to be negative, but what I'm seeing is, how the heck are we going to do it? So now we have to think about our course as a committee and what can we do, like you just said, John? What grants could we attract? What could we offer, as a city to get a developer to bite in on this? And I think the first step is to have those folks come in here and educate us on, as a small developer, I don't want anything to do with grants and government. No way. I don't know about you guys, but you probably do, but I don't. I like to build what I like to build, and I don't want to be told what to do. But I think that's what it's going to take. That was the whole reason for my exercise, was to figure out if we could actually pull this off. And I don't mean to be negative, I'm going to say it again, but I'm bummed. I don't see an avenue. I really don't, unless the Fed government writes a check for $200,000. This isn't going to happen.
Yeah. So let me ask this then, because those are great points for sure. I mean, if what we have the ability to do within this committee is recommend policy, is there anything, Mike, like from your idea, like, hey, we needed infusion of income into this project to even make it work? I mean, I know what comes to my mind, but I'm curious to know, like, from your perspective, what is it that we can control or recommend as at this committee that would help with that infusion?
I'll go back to what we've talked about many times before. To me, it's either a trust or it's a 501c3 organization that people can trust putting their money into. It's a little separate from the city, and you can use that organization whether it's through either vehicle. I think that's the way to do it.
One of the attractions of this, I thought, and the reason I wrote it this way, it was a 10-year deal, which is long 10 years. But at the end of the 10th year, then the contract with the city ends and they can go to market if they want, which we know is happening right now, right, George? So that was sort of the teaser, if you will, because this property would be built very inexpensively, possibly as expensively as you could ever dream of doing it. And in 10 years, you would enjoy market value if they decided to do that with a property. That was sort of the carrot, the only one I could think of to dangle in front of a developer to get him to even consider doing this. Luther?
Would the city be able to contribute to the 501c3, bringing up the $2.2 million that we lose to retraining officers? If there's a savings there for the city or for the police department or fire or whoever, then is that something that the city could say, hey, we saved $2 million, we're going to contribute $200,000 to this 501c3?
And just to add to that, I mean, because that's a great point, instead of thinking of general fund stuff, would that be funds that could go to the 501c3 from the self-generated, say this person does come in here and is working on behalf of the city and obtaining grants, right? Like, let's just throw that in there too. So it's not just on the general fund of the city, but the fund's already created. This person's seeking grants, governmental money for housing-related issues that towns are experiencing. And then from that fund, there's a contribution to a 501c3. Just to add that to it, might as well, right?
Well, first, let me just go back real quick to a comment somebody said. In no meeting have I been or talked to anybody that the city is either willing or desires to become a landlord. I think, again, the commission, if you look at the 30,000-foot look at it, it's crafting policy that will open the door for the workforce housing. It's not physically doing it ourselves. What Randy presented here, I think, is great for the public that have no idea what the construction industry is like. This is a look into something I have been talking about for years, as a builder myself, this is really down to the nitty-gritty of what it takes to build a workforce housing unit. Okay? People have to understand this part of it. But for you guys as a commission, you've got to kind of get a bigger, broader view of how can we as a city do realistically, what can we do? And again, it's the policy of opening the door to the developers coming in here. Again, the ADU situation, the home of your own, something, look at the money as a developer you save by having a set of blueprints that's already permitted. Those are big, huge savings. Those are some of the things that we can do. This was just an eye-opening, I'm sure that took you a lot of time and work to be able to, look at those numbers. And I don't think a lot of people in the public, and maybe some even on the commission, understand everything that goes into building a project.
I type with 2 fingers, Connie. So
Yeah,
it
that
took me
did take a long time. Typical contractor.
Yeah, I know. You said, though, that I would think there'd be some attraction to having a packet ready on this project to say, here you go.
Yeah, if we have some small-time builders in the city of Prescott that are limited on time, because the construction industry, time is money, and they're going to be working, but they would decide they want to step into this, I think what you presented here just scared a whole bunch of them off. But it is reality, and they do have to understand. You can't go into this blind. That's why you have to understand the formula or the model of what works. And we don't, as a commission, need to reinvent that. It's being done out there. We just have to be able to understand it. But again, a small-time contractor here with 50 employees, they're not going to have the time to go out and try to fetch all these grants and all that kind of thing, which is going to be their profit at the end of the day. But so it's a dilemma. But we're not alone in this.
But we heard from Baja, remember? They told us that time is what killed them, getting approvals, remember? They were only approving so many units at a time, and it took too long.
Yeah, Ben Snyder.
Yeah, Ben's deal. So, fantasizing here, what if we were to go forward with developing this on paper and actually approved it, George? Can you weigh in here? In other words, here's an approved set of whatever.
So we actually have a program like that for commercial developers already. It's called a model plan process. They get a review of the model plan. That model plan can be placed on a lot. There's no further review. It gets reviewed one time. What gets reviewed on the individual lot is the site layout and the foundation, because it varies from lot to lot. But that's easy to do. We do it all the time. We've been doing it for years. The model plan or a model site plan type of process has been in the city's repertoire for, well, that's the biggest word I've used all day, for over a decade. We've done that. As Connie mentioned earlier, there are a lot of companies that are already doing some of this, and they have a pattern already set. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't treat this project like a home of your own project. It's pre-designed and pre-approved. If someone wants to build it, those steps are already taken care of. That's part of the marketing of it and part of the cost savings to the developer, so maybe they do make a profit on it. So this is just a scaled up version of a home of your own. It's 6 homes of your own for a developer to put in on a property, but pre-reviewed, pre-approved by the city, and maybe at the expense of the city to do that. Maybe that's our skin in the game, is to eat the costs of that plan review and eat the cost of the design review part of the project. And then we have a package that you could hand out, just like you would hand the home of your own plan package to someone and say, you can build this, it's already approved, all I need to see is a site review for the location you pick.
Well, that would help whittle away on that $198,000 shortfall. I don't think it would absorb all of it, but it would help.
No, it's in the paragraph.
It's in there. The bank weighed in on, Penn Bank weighed in on all this with me.
George, if you have somebody coming in with a small planned area development in terms of workforce housing, is it reasonable? Because I think I read this somewhere in some of the literature at the city, to you would be giving them a benefit if you could do a 180-day turnaround, 3 months, right? Because what is, if project just goes through the normal course of all the planning stages, the red lines, it's way longer, sometimes up to 8 months to a year. So could the city realistically make a promise that they could do a turnaround in 180 days? That's too small.
Too broad a question because the scale of the project is going to make a difference. The complexity of the design is going to make a difference. We can help them, again, if they were to have multiple buildings, for instance, and have one design for all the buildings, and we do one review for all the buildings, and then we're done. So that part, we could shorten the process up. Most of the review process for building permitting is not in the city's hands. We account for a third of the time, not half of the time.
But what is the average?
2/3 of the time is the hands of the developers, architects, engineers, et cetera, addressing the issues that we bring up. So that part of the process, maybe we could shave a third of the time off by making our part faster, but it's still going to require, they have to be able to react to us. Again, the model plan approach, the 5 buildings on a site, but only one design for 5 buildings, and us doing only one review for those 5 buildings is the best way to save time. Again, a model plan has been something in our toolbox for a decade or more.
So that could be something that we could suggest to new people stepping into this is put your plan in long before you obtain your funding. Because the plan review time, what part of the detriment to that are the holding costs, the interest on the money that they're holding, and then they start the plan review. So now you're paying interest for up to a year in some cases, which goes right off of your profit. So that's a little trick that somebody needs to tell these people. Put your plans in, get them approved, and then go for your funding.
The whole deal here is there wasn't going to be a whole lot of holding costs until you actually broke ground because the joint venture with the city, there's no cost of the land. They're not charging interest. They're just joint venturing or second trust deed or whatever. And then the plans that I reviewed with George have already been approved here in the city. It's the ones I built. So I was just going to reuse what is. It's already engineered. It's already designed. It's pretty easy, right? Basically, I think our biggest issue was making it fit on the site within the setbacks. And we did that. He looked it over and we came up with a plan that would work. So I think the review time would, especially if we pre-approved it, would be pretty fast. And I don't think there would be much carry time until you actually broke ground. Versus a regular development, if I went out and bought that lot from the city and I had to sit on it for months, I'm losing money, right?
Yeah.
Time is money and money is time. In this case, that's not occurring. But I think the biggest thing is how do we get the word out that the city's even willing to do this? And I'm not sure they are. I haven't heard from council that they are, the joint venture.
Council
idea.
hasn't been asked yet.
I know. I've talked individually,
Yeah.
but not as a group. But if they are willing to do that, then how do we get the word out to developers? Hey, look, we got this piece of property that we're going to do this with you. No carry. And that's pretty big. So, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's what I was hoping to get today.
Yeah, and food for thought for us, like we talked about, like keeping that mental notepad of the workforce housing policy is like the model plan works well for subdivisions because the lots are all the same, right? Or close to being the same. You have 6 to 8 whatever models, and you're plopping them on all those lots. What makes it challenging with a multifamily type unit is that you can take, say, the project you have right now, right? Go through the city, have it model planned or reviewed and everything, but then you go put it on a site that's maybe half acre larger, and then now that doesn't fit, right? Because now there's a lot of unusable void space that's not going to work. So then you still have to go and review for the next 4 units that you want to add. So it gets a little challenging. What I like to earmark though is from something George said is, yes, in theory, it's very hard to agree to say your review is going to be 180 days because the applicant has a lot to do with that, their engineering and all that stuff. But maybe what we could do as a committee is recommend to council to say, well, part of this workforce policy, workforce housing policy is that as the city receives the stuff from our engineers, there's a certain time that you'll prioritize comments back right? So then it's not necessarily holding the city to your 180 days, but my engineer took, 100 of those days or 140 of those days, and now the city's scrambling to make the reviews. But maybe the mechanism is as we submit things, it's the highest priority on the list with, say, a 30-day back review, right? Or something like that. Would you say that's more feasible, doable, George, from your perspective? Okay.
Well, we better have an explanation to be able to tell the developers that were in line that got bumped, I'd be one of them,
Yeah.
as to why that happened.
And maybe part of the combination of those things is that we do agree to take you out of order if you're a workforce housing project. It flies in the face of fairness of first come, first serve, because that's normally how we do plan review. The little plan review that's stuck behind the brand new hospital is the unlucky guy who's second in line. But if it's a workforce housing project, maybe they get pulled next after whatever project we're working on. That's not something that's part of our typical program. We do try to fairly take projects by order of their arrival. We intersperse that with some mixing in, take a break from the big project and do 5 little ones before you go back to the next big project for plan review. But keep in mind that even a complicated plan review on our side, week to 2 weeks of someone's time to do a really complicated plan review. It's not 180 days. The 180 days is the back and forth between us and the developer. It's not us doing it all. So we can shorten it, but we can't shorten it a huge amount. What we can do is make commitments like if you promise the turnaround time is short on your end, we'll promise the turnaround time is short on our end. And that will move a project faster through. That just means they have to have an arrangement with their engineers and architects, and we have control over our plans reviewers.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Real quick, just back to your grant question. We do have options of, sorry, I feel like that was a couple conversations ago, but
Luther's question?
yeah,
Okay.
about if the city could take funding and put it into or I think it was Mike's, either way, put it into a 501c3. We do have grant programs, CBDG. We have them through our tourism department that we do issue grants. Our Change for the Better grant goes to 501c3s to help with the homeless. So I feel like we could find an avenue for that as well.
Great.
And then Matt shoots me.
No, you're not wrong.
Oh, first time.
Interesting. No, I think the analysis for the question you pose would be a gift clause analysis. The Constitution of Arizona doesn't allow the city to pledge its credit or give money to a private party. And it doesn't make a distinction between for-profit or nonprofit. So the issue is there's 2 issues. Is there a public purpose? That's easily satisfied with moderate workforce housing. And the second issue is, what's the consideration? What does the city get? What's the benefit of the bargain to the city by giving back this money? And those have to be direct benefits. They can't be incidental benefits. So I don't know the answer because I haven't considered it yet, but that's kind of the analysis that we'd be looking at. Is the city getting something tangible back for, maybe giving back a couple $100,000? So that's going to be kind of the issue.
Matt.
Can I ask a question? So if
Go ahead, Jordan.
one of the things that Randy was talking about earlier is the fact that we spend an awful lot of money training policemen and firemen over their first couple of years and then have them leave afterwards. Is that something could be considered a direct benefit of not, I hate to use the term investing training money into someone who's going to go elsewhere?
And I honestly don't know the answer to that because it hasn't been considered, but it's going to be kind of, you look at the cases like that Turkin case that came out of Phoenix, where Phoenix subsidized the development to the tune of $6 million. And the direct benefit that the city was going to get back were 5 or 6 parking spaces in a parking garage. Well, the court said, no, that's, ridiculous. It's not equitable.
Can you tell them a little more about that? I don't think they
About
that case.
Oh, it was a private development, commercial development down in Phoenix, and the developers are looking for some incentives and help from the city to make the project pencil out. The city invested, I would say, I don't remember the exact amount, but let's say $6 million to make the project work and other incentives. And I think the Goldwater Institute probably challenged that and said, what is the city getting out of this? And the best that the city could come up with in defending its position for allocating the $6 million was, well, they promised we can have some parking spaces in a giant parking garage that was going to serve this commercial development. And the court said, no, that's just too inequitable. It's not a big enough direct benefit. And it kind of goes back to contract law for consideration is what's the benefit of the bargain? If the city's giving you $6 million, you better be getting something directly back. And it started making a distinction between incidental benefits, which they considered increasing the tax base, because you have all this new commercial taxation coming in, increasing jobs, because you have all this commercial space coming back in. And they said, that's not good enough. The city needs to have an actual direct benefit from this. That's quantifiable.
And it wouldn't work because we couldn't guarantee that the employee would not live there a year and then move on anyway.
Yeah, there's a good chance a court would say it's probably an incidental versus a direct benefit.
But
Well,
if you
I haven't thought about
if
it.
you made it part of the recruiting package, could it then be considered that?
Yeah. I don't know, because a lot of these haven't been challenged. I mean, the gift clause litigation just started about 10 years ago, and now it infiltrates every decision that governments are making now when it comes to spending money on development, whether commercial or kind of nonprofit. So,
using Taylor Hicks as an example, there was they had to cross the same bridge, right? They had to be like, what's the value we're gaining here as a city, and then what are we contributing? In that case, it was easy. Right now, it's in theory because we have no project, but let's just say we do have a project. Say it's this project, right? And the rents are somewhat established, and the developer builder says 2 of these units will go to city police officers or fire department. Would there be, just as Taylor Hicks worked out, would there be more inclination for the city to say, okay, well, now there's clearly we can make out the rent for 10 years and figure out that we can make the contribution to this 501c3 or whatever that is because we're gaining 2 units? Like, would it make sense?
Yeah, you're getting closer, right? You're getting something out of it. I don't know if it gets you over the hurdle, but you're kind of thinking in the right direction. There is a distinction between the Taylor Hicks and the Prescott project because you're dealing with 2 public agencies and public entities that by statute under Title 11 are allowed to work together and use joint resources to do a cooperative agreement called an intergovernmental agreement. So it's a little bit different, but with your example where you're working with a private developer, then that's when you really want to start thinking about that gift clause issue.
Because back to Mike's point, like the way I see it is you see a project like this and you go, what can we do to really encourage a developer builder to do this? And it's either the deferment of costs down the road, right? You're pushing out costs out and you're getting the benefit down 10 years down the road. You cash in on the profit, if you will, at that point. Or you're seeing some infusion of supplemental income, right? Like grants or whatnot. So for me, I'm thinking for us to just digest on this as a committee is I would just say, okay, maybe the city doesn't just write a check for $100,000 into this 501c3. It's based on a project, but you go, okay, we're going to get this developer has a project, fits under workforce housing. The city can contribute $100,000 and they're getting 4 units. Like, I feel like we're getting closer now to at least be able to legally overcome the hurdle of saying, well, there's we're locking in rents that, amount to this much money and this much value to the city to be able to afford, to be able to write the check. I guess a soft yes is good enough for now, Matt.
It's a soft yes.
Yeah, okay, because it's at least for us, it still leaves it on the table. So when we do start really diving into the policy stuff, we start bringing that up again and go, why can't we ask for the city to contribute some money if we're going to offer them units for workforce housing?
Yep, and I think that's a valid recommendation. So I look at something like this, and in my mind, I'm thinking if I'm a commission member and I need to pull out big, broad-based policies, which is what the council wants you to do. They want you to recommend things that kind of broadly based. The first one is 411 Larkin Street, 0.34 acres. So the policy would be City of Prescott will inventory all of its existing real property that could be developed as either single-family or multifamily housing. Policy number 2, and I think, Randy, you brought up the question, is can the city build its own buildings for workforce housing on its own property? The answer is yes. And that may be another policy. City will inventory all existing real property and identify certain properties that can be developed for workforce housing. And the third policy can be city will inventory all its property and figure out which ones may be best for being developed privately. So this is helpful because it kind of leads you to the big policy questions that you can kind of extract from this. And I can keep going down the list, but I think you get the concept. City will not charge for certain typical fees and costs, which was the Gwen Roach. And I think George identified some of the community development dollars. City will, in certain cases, pay for the impact fees. I think that would probably be discretionary ultimately with the council, but that can be a recommendation. That's, this is how you start kind of closing that $200,000 gap that you've identified. This is helpful, I think.
That helps. Because, Mike, to your point, the crux of it, and I feel it when you say it too, that's why I asked you, because I was like, I know what my mind goes to, but the 501c3 land trust thing puts it outside of our hands here, right? That's the frustration. So I guess all we can control is like, well, how do we still integrate those two entities within our scope as a committee with the city being involved with that, right? And to me, the second thing that came up too is that person that we want here at the city. That person could, pleasantly surprise all of us and be like, wow, we have $350,000, $500,000 in grants. I have worked closely with other nonprofits that are finding more and more housing-related grants from many different avenues, which is encouraging, right? So now Arizona Foundation, all these different giant places where they're looking at housing and going, that's a problem, are writing big checks. So to me, it's like 501c3 land trust, absolutely. Can we control that? No. What can we control? Getting a person to represent the interest of the city to maybe help with bringing in some of that income in here, right? So I think and that's helpful, man. Thank you for.
And it's a multi-pronged approach. That's something the city can do because it has property.
Sure.
Then it's getting to Connie's point. Well, go buy a piece of private property and figure out a development scheme that you can make money on.
Well, the other
tax
thing,
schemes,
and
incentives.
you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the gift clause is a big thing when you're dealing with taxpayer dollars. So the city can't ever just say, and actually Randy's got it noted up there where it says end of 10-year time frame, developer owner could take property to market value, and note to city would be payment due in full. What the city can do, rather than just hand the property over and sign the title to you, cannot do that. That is a violation of the gift clause. But we can do a very long hold, and you can make, and this is an exaggeration, $15 a month payment, just so long as eventually those tax dollars get back into the coffers of the taxpayer. So we can help out by deferring the payment, but we can't sign the property over to you as a gift and say, here, now go do what you're doing. That's a violation. So you have it right, Randy, right there. Go ahead and use it. Use it to make money, to build up money on it. But at the end of the day, after the 10-year hold, the money would be paid back in some way, shape, or form, and you've got it market value. That's something that could happen, and the city could do that legally.
Well, that was my idea, Connie, was that in 10 years, the property's going to appreciate. Actually, in year one, the property appreciated because, once again, you cannot build it as cheaply as you could potentially build this with all the volunteer, and I'll do it at cost statements I received as I looked into this. So through appreciation, it would be very easy to pay the city back for the developer that owned this.
And that has to be broken down and has to be accounted for because that is a form of property. And so it can pay for itself.
At the 10-year mark, it can pay for itself. Yeah, that was my whole idea here. That in 10 years, no, remember I said this when I first started this, everybody wins. Remember that, guys? No losers here, win, win, win. I just quite haven't gotten to the total win yet with this $200,000 shortfall. And that was, I'm loving what's going on here, by the way. That was the whole idea behind why I did this, to stimulate this conversation that we're actually having. Because I think we're getting some meat on the bone here, and maybe we'll come up with a way to actually create this shortfall differential. Mike's ideas, whoever, and then now we have something. We really have a tangible, viable project that we can hand to Mr. Developer and say, here you go. Not going to make a lot of money now, but you could potentially make a ton later in 10 years. Is that a big enough carrot? I don't know. Luther, comment? Is that a big enough carrot? It's a long hold.
The hold is not the problem. It's just, making it pencil and not going into a hole before,
Right.
before the 10 years.
But you have to evaluate whether or not that money that you're holding for 10 years couldn't be making money.
Well, that was my other thought, guys, is that over that 10-year period, that rent will go up, right? It always does. And your costs are fixed down here at year one, maybe with the exception of property tax and insurance. So you may enjoy some profit along the way. I said in here that you can't take that profit. That profit's got to be held in a state or a trust, I mean. And then at the end of the 10 years, it's your profit. It's been sitting there for 10 years. It's been building, whatever. That money could be used to pay the city back for the land part of the project. It could pay for itself. I know. So, I don't know. Just some ideas to dangle the carrot.
I'm biting my tongue over here.
Oh, no, don't.
You're bleeding.
So with all due respect to current council, the city is going in a direction that is counter to this commission. I mean, we're going to increase sales tax, we're going to increase water rates, we're going to increase impact fees. The public works side of things gets more and more expensive. So we are becoming more and more non-affordable versus the other. So the further we go, the more it's going to take outside dollars to close that gap. And that gap is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. So as long as Fan Contracting or the City of Prescott or Dignity Health or anybody else says we really need affordable housing, we're all going to have to chip in. And if that's not going to happen, then frankly, we're wasting our time.
Yep.
I mean, there is a cost to this, and it's dollars, and that gap is not going to just magically disappear. It's going to be there, and somebody has to close it. So the people that need to have a place at the table need to be willing to write a check.
Yeah.
I mean,
When
call it what it is.
When I wrote this up, Mike, I had you in mind as being the guy that would write that check.
Yeah,
really did.
I mean, this is a great example of, this is only 6 units. Let's say we need 600 units.
Yeah. Sure.
Which we do.
Yeah.
It's a big check, but if it's going to provide me as a businessman in this community with the ability to hire the people I need to make my business successful, why wouldn't I write that check?
You're the guy I was dangling the carrot for when I did this. I mean it.
Yeah. No, I get that. Well, and all that means to me too, Mike, is that the ask, if that's the way that council is going to be evolving to, our ask, and I'm sure we're not a bashful group of people, is going to be bigger.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Right.
going to be uncomfortable, but that's what we're here for. It's uncomfortable. We looked at the data. We're starving for workforce housing. We've looked at all the facets of where the city, can make some contribution, whether it be in time, whether it be in waiving some fees, taking a hit in the general fund for impact fees, whatever. It's going to be a big ask, right? The more we're moving that way, the bigger the ask is, but we're going to ask, right? That's all we can do.
And to the gift question, there is beneficial use to anybody that's whether it's private business or a 501c, what's Dignity, C3? Is it Dignity? Okay. Or the city of Prescott or the town of Prescott Valley or Yavapai County. I mean, clearly there's beneficial use to all of us. So I think there are certainly ways to write it up to where it would not ever be a gift. Quote.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Anything else on that we can dissect or poke holes at or food for thoughts? Yeah.
Randy, just a question for you. And again, thanks for putting all this together for us. Would it be helpful, and maybe this is more to the committee as well, if we had a really rough budget of how you came up with all of this, where it shows like a line item for here are the impact fees related to this project, and here are the other development fees related to this project, so we can really put some numbers. For me, I'm kind of feeling like I'm in this ethereal space of what are we really asking for? I mean, potentially to the council.
Well, I mean, everything's a price per square foot, so yeah, that can be done fairly easily. I mean, I know what they cost to build. I built them. If that's what you're asking. You're asking for a line item breakdown?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
There's your volunteer right there.
Oh, so just to be clear, so when Gwen was here, we have asked for that. As a committee, I think we've asked Gwen to take a multifamily project, which is like this, and a single family residential project and just lay out all the fees.
City
City fees of engineering, inspection fees, water meter fees, everything fees, impact fees.
We do have a fee schedule that we can get to you that covers most of that, probably enough to give you a real clear idea.
From the ComDev side? Or is that all related?
And from engineering.
Well, George,
Engineering.
we have, you and I, we have blueprint here, basically. Can't we get really specific with this one? Couldn't we actually assign fees to this development right here? I mean, it wouldn't be that hard, would it?
We could treat it as if it were an application. and
That's what I
come up
mean,
with a
yeah.
fee
Treat it as
schedule.
It'd make
an
the most
application.
sense
Yeah.
for sure, since this is the project we haven't.
That would be the answer they're looking for.
So that's, so Gwen's on the engineering side of fees, and then ComDev will have like the building permit fee, that kind of, okay.
So what we can do, sorry. Mike. So what we can do is I'll get with George and we'll send your project to both ComDev and Public Works, because I know that I reminded them that you do want a list, but I'll have them create it specifically for this project.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if you still have the blueprints on me or not, but I have them. You don't have my microfiche?
For your project,
Yeah, call apartments.
Yes.
Because you would have them, so you have everything. I mean, I'll come in and show you which one exactly we're talking about, but
Yeah.
He's showing his age.
who, him or me?
Okay. You good, Nicole, anything?
So I would think we could actually do that from the city side fairly easily. We have a layout.
Amber, can I ask that we have, I mean, I know I'm like foreshadowing here into future agenda items, but is there a chance we can have those next meeting or before next meeting?
I don't see
George?
why not, but it's something that's not in my realm. Do you
Is that
think
possible,
we could
George?
get-
To get that fee schedule for this project before next meeting?
We could try. There may be some difference between what.
I know, right?
Sorry, I know.
Not enough mic.
People in there. There may be some difference in the project you've built versus what we've looked at here as far as like the elevation, the heights of the building, the floors. That was 2 floors, right?
Two,
This
yeah.
is
No,
1.
no change.
So there's some difference between the type of fees, but not very much. So we should be able to come up with something pretty close.
Okay.
All right, great. Anything else on Randy's project?
Hey, I just want to say thank you for
Thank you for
taking
your
the time to look at it and comment, and was my hope.
For sure. Very
Thanks.
helpful, Randy. Thanks for all your time on that.
Put it together.
Yeah, that's super helpful. All right, we will close that item and move on to item 3C, presentation discussion regarding timeline of the workforce housing policy.
Okay, I probably didn't have
Amber.
a presentation. We get a slide.
Okay, yep.
We had talked with Chair Rocha and Vice Chair Kennedy about the staff working to take everything that you guys have talked about, everything that we plan to talk about, and really start getting it into a policy form that hopefully over the next few months, we will start talking about everything you guys want in a policy. And then hopefully bringing a draft for review in March. And then hopefully, because we want it to be as much done with this committee before we may or may not have new members in May. And then have a draft for approval by this committee, then to go to council by April. So that's kind of the goal timeline. So if you have ideas, thoughts, send it in an email of like, I really want this in there. We can put it in there, and then, yeah, you guys, once we bring a draft, you guys can tear it apart, readjust it, whatever you need to do. And then once it's where you want, then we'll take it to council.
On that real quick, Amber, is it appropriate to have, say, Luther's thinking through water, right? And he's like thinking, okay, I want to propose to the committee that we ask that the council consider a separate bucket for workforce housing for water, and he jots down a couple of ideas of what that would be. Can he email that to you?
He can email it to me,
Just you?
just
Right.
me.
And then that could be something we're putting in the notepad for that policy
Yes.
to bring to the, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that clear because it's hard sometimes to just do it all here. But sometimes, at night our brains are going and we're like, oh, okay, we haven't talked about maybe percentage of new projects allocate to workforce housing. And I write out a couple of things. I can send them to Amber and then she'll keep tally of those things so we can actually dive into it as a committee. So that's,
Yeah, I'll start
that's
compiling.
helpful to do that.
Yeah, so even if it's 3 a.m., send me an email. I won't check it at 3 a.m., hopefully. But send me an email, and then that way I can keep having a running list and work with everybody to create it into a policy format.
Does that, this agenda item is really just for us feeling comfortable with that timeline? Like, do we feel like quite frankly, my goal for the committee would be moving forward at every meeting from this point on is probably to go, all right, let's talk about engineering fees or all the city fees that include a project, and what do we want to say we get rid of or recommend to the council to put into this policy to recommend to council, and just start flat out getting the big ask out there on paper.
Well, shouldn't we?
need to start checking off things now.
Yeah, sure.
Get them done and go to the next one, because we continue to talk about, we get stuck in the mud a lot. I hate to say that, but we have been. So take item number 1, okay, let's move on to item number 2. That's decided, we're not gonna change it.
Yep,
Because the list is not getting any shorter if we don't do that.
sure.
And that's obviously the low-hanging fruit also. It's much easier for the city to look at waiving fees than actually writing a check, and that is their contribution. They are paying staff to review plans. They are using taxpayer dollars to pay an impact fee and things like that. So it's certainly an easier ask than writing a check.
But shouldn't we wait until we get this back from George and we see the breakdown, the percentages,
That's why
then we go
want
after the big ones?
But that's why we want it before the next meeting.
Okay.
Because if we have that and we can look at all those fees, I like to have the conversation of like, what do we want to get rid of?
Yeah, you're not going to get them all, but
Can we waive them?
prioritize
Can
them.
we defer some? Can we
Yeah.
100% just ask the city to pay for them? I think those are the next, I think we're at that point as a committee where we're diving into what we want to put in writing for that policy and then take it to council.
And
Solid
while we're thinking of all that, we have to think about what the this for that is. If the city's going to waive all these fees, if we're going to do all these things, do we want a guaranteed price point? Do we want a guaranteed rent point? Like,
Absolutely.
those are the questions. I think, I'm not a fan of price controls, but we've got to think about things that the developer has to contribute as well.
And it can't just be a one-time deal. It's got to be 10 years or some, you know what I mean?
But, I mean, it could be a one-time deal, it could be 10 years, but we have to think about because I know council's going to be like, well, if we give up this, what do we,
Right.
What are we getting?
right.
And that's going to be quite honestly, the bulk of our discussion really is going to be like, okay, so we want all these fees gone, right? All right, well, what's the city going to be asking for? And it's not necessarily our position to be like, well, what is council, like, we're not playing both roles, but it's something to consider, right? Like, one thing that's come up a lot is enforceability, right? We have all these great ideas. Mike had a great example of some years ago of being asked also, can you participate in helping us with, an allocation of a new project for workforce housing or whatever it was, right, Mike? And you're like, sure. How? Like, what do I do now? Like, who helps me? And there was nothing in place for it. So there's legals working on some of that enforceability stuff even now to see, like, what are the best ways to have the city feel comfortable with, it's like, okay, well, you come in here at this price point. Now we need to lock you in, right, for 10 years or whatever. And that's going to be that's going to be something dealt with on the legal side. But those are the types of conversations. So by the time we're done with that meeting, we're like, okay, so this is our ask, right? Like, put it on the policy. That would be the goal.
So something that I think would really help is just to start off with, to get everybody's brains kind of going on it, is to start thinking of headers. What headers do you want? What are the 5 big policy, 30,000 foot view headers do you want in the policy? And then we could bring that and clean that up of what headers, and then everybody can start contributing to specific items. I don't know.
I think the other thing would be to determine what the city would be willing to do with city-owned land. I mean, I just sort of fantasize they would agree to this after talking with Connie, but I don't know that they would. So it'd be nice to know what they would do so that we can talk to developers about that.
I think that's one of the headers, right?
Yeah.
City-owned land. One question I have, and curious, Amber, if we think the ADU language is separate from this, if it's lower hanging fruit that we could potentially propose in the next 2 months rather than wait until next spring. I'd love to have a win this fall if we could.
Sorry, George. That's you. Or Chelsea. Okay, doable.
Yeah, awesome. And then the other question, and I don't want to get too far under the weeds, but I just wanted to add, I think while we're talking about this policy language, it's really great, but I'd also love to continue the conversation of what the community outreach looks like, particularly since we're in this climate right now with council and the increased fees and all of the things that are going on. I think it's timely that we are engaging with the community and getting their feedback and hearing from them as to how they might want to partner with us, or even just letting them know what we're working on. Because when we do get to the point where we're presenting to council, I would love to invite those community members who are engaged to be here in the room and to really be a big presence to show that we've got a lot of community support behind this.
Yeah.
Let me just wrap. So do we feel, just back to this, the agenda item of that time frame, do we feel like as a committee that's doable?
Recruiting tool.
March 2025, to have that policy, the first draft, right? First draft of that policy, essentially the draft version of that policy.
Yeah, everything we talk about from here till then,
Okay.
if we take chunks, just having it in a draft view to, pick apart.
Okay. Amber, is there any way you can, I don't know if you do that through minutes or whatnot, but because you guys are always the ones typing away, do you feel like you can maybe propose like the top 5 to 10 or so headers just based on dialogues here?
Oh, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
think that
can
would
send
be
an email.
helpful for us just to almost recap everything
Okay.
that seems to be the highlights of what we talk about and just throw them out there. Can
Thank
you
you.
just email that?
Yep.
That'd be
And
great.
Now.
Yeah.
And I have a question for Matt. So all of this evolves around, evolves around the definition of workforce housing. Is one of the steps going to be that we need the council to adopt the definition of workforce housing? I mean, if we're going to tie things to workforce housing, the reason I say this is you reminded me of my own experience when it came right down to it. There was no defined a truly defined definition. Is that something the council will need to adopt?
Oh, I think so. It'll be part either, and you can do it two ways, I suppose. One is you can present them with your draft initial recommendation. It'll be your final document recommending to them. And one of the things would be, they'll either adopt that definition that you've come up with or not. I suppose the other thing you can do is try to shoot it up the ladder now. Yeah, so did I. But it was maybe just a work session. Yeah. Yeah.
So we did adopt a workforce definition of what ranges of pay count. And then we did adopt a workforce housing definition of it is no more than 30% of the household gross income, including utilities, prioritizing. I think what keeps coming up over the past couple meetings is like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like wanting a square footage, wanting like how many bedrooms, how many baths. But we do technically have what affordability of housing counts as workforce housing. So I don't know if it's being looked at for like what tangible products count. If that's the case, we might want to come up with a different definition wording, but.
And that's part of my concern, because as we talk about, because there's two components of workforce housing, whether it's a rental unit or a purchase unit, and we know it should not be any more than, let's use that term, 30% of the household income. So defining what that household income was, defining whether it includes utility or doesn't include utilities, all of the, what we want to be careful of, in my opinion, is that we have that we recommend a firm definition. So when it comes to promoting that workforce housing, there's no wiggle room. That everybody understands what it is. There's nobody that can skirt the requirements to avoid paying fees, for instance, and things like that. So I think that definition needs to be very well defined on what that means, and it needs to be probably adopted by council as maybe an ordinance. It says we're going to define workforce housing as this and list all of those details about it. So there's no question. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this definition is pretty tight.
Is it?
Yeah. I'll read it to you, and you guys tell me. It's the definition of workforce housing definition. You also define workforce above that. But this is workforce housing definition. Workforce housing refers to residential properties, such as apartments or homes, that are designed to be affordable for individuals and families. This is different from a direct government subsidized housing program, the city of Prescott does not have a housing authority, period. The goal is to offer housing that is no more than 30% of their household gross income, including utilities, prioritizing and coordinating a vetting process to identify those with the greater need. This will provide the target monthly workforce housing rent/mortgage amount of $1,150 not including utilities, So if you guys want to kind of discuss that at a future meeting as to whether you want to kind of redefine that, you can certainly do that.
And I kind of feel like I know where you're going with this too, Mike, where like, for example, in this example of Randy's project that he's been working on, 120% of AMI was 91,000, whatever that sheet says. And then 30% of that was $2,280 a month. So, I mean, in essence, you can have someone come in market value stuff, right, and say, well, we fall under 120, right? And it's like our rents are at $2,280 a month. And so now we have this problem of going like, well, great. I mean, $2,280 technically falls within this parameters, but now we also know that there's $2,300 units for rent now, right? So is that kind of what you're concerned a little bit?
Well, we're sitting here talking about rental units, but what this commission has talked about in the past is there are several ways to address the challenge. One of them is down payment assistance. One of them is providing rental units. But one thing that I think needs more definition is if somebody comes and says, I'm going to build workforce housing for sale to help individuals build equity, young families, yeah, ownership. So then it comes into, okay, what's the monthly payment if it meets that? Is it a 20-year mortgage? Is it 30? Is it 50? You get into all kinds of things, questions on if I'm offering for sale for ownership, what's that number? And there's a lot of things that come into play when you get there. So having some definition, I think, additional definition, I think is going to be needed. I really do.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you just add that to maybe a future agenda
just-
item, so you can really just focus on that.
Hey, John, when I proposed this project, I took 30% of a starting firefighter, police officer income. And with utility, I'm right there, right at 30%.
I'm wondering if every year we have a range, because it's going to change annually based on the HUD, is it HUD numbers? So maybe we have, and we get an average of what the utilities are in this community that we're factoring in, because we don't want to forget the utilities and the 30%. And then say, okay, so for 2024, the low end is 1,200 and the high end is 2,100, whether it's your mortgage payment, ideally on a fixed rate, right? Or it's your rent. Either way, it's the same payment range, right? I don't know.
And I'd like to think about what kind of square footage we're tying that to, because you could say, well, I'm renting this house for $2,000 and it's 500 square feet. So we want to kind of tie that to that too, because if we're trying to attract families and all those sorts of things.
Right.
One thing that I did think about for the for sale aspect is if we do offer these kinds of things, the benefit could be a scaled out profit recapture, so that like over the 10-year period, you know, if it gets resold year one, then the majority of the profit recapture goes to the Workforce Housing Trust, and that could replenish those funds that go to the other projects. So there could be a way of keeping it from, you know, we build workforce housing and then it gets resold at market value by the
Yeah,
next
that's-
person.
yeah.
So we have to kind of try to keep that for a longer duration, but I would definitely want to see a sunset on it.
But would we do that if we did down payment assistance? Under down payment assistance,
Well, the
I
down
don't
payment
think
is
so, because they're earning that by working.
right. That would be
At
its
this
own
point, I'll
thing.
bring it back to the timeline agendized item. We're getting a little off. Well, but when we get to future agenda items, we can kind of add those for a future.
Yeah. So,
So I think for now, everybody seemed okay with that timeline.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. So we'll close it off. Go to item 4, updates, staff announcements, discussion regarding future agenda items. Let me flip. Can I flip? I'm going to flip those. So since we're already on future agenda items from the conversation we're following now, anything else for future agenda items? I mean, did you like Luther's?
Yeah. So I can
Topics?
move all of that over.
Okay.
It's easy.
All right, cool. Definition of, and that's a good point too about like obviously square footage, right? I don't think we've ever talked about that, but that's a good point. I mean, having $2,200 rental units or even something for sale in like a 700 square foot, 500 square foot unit is probably not what we would like for our folks. So that might be something worth discussing for sure. What else?
And don't forget that the HUD guidelines are based on, you spoke more about a double income family, but they also change with a single income. And I think the limit was 30 and they just raised it up to 60. So if you get too defined, you get a little restrictive. I'm all for the guidelines for the builders, but maybe be a little more vague on that because incomes are going to change, that kind of thing. So if you follow the HUD income, because remember, a single income person should still be able to have all the requirements met for a low income loan, but it does pop up when you have a dual income.
Yeah, that's true. Future agenda items, I would probably throw in policy headers. would be great to just establish those and then go to work on chipping away at those headers. And yeah, that's fine. Yeah. You want to say that part or you?
I heard. Community outreach.
I don't know if we. City fees, or let's call it city permitting. Can we throw that on future agenda items? That'll kind of come up out of the headers, I'm sure, for the policy, but, you know, that including time, review time, fee schedule, that kind of stuff. It seems like we're so much into that conversation now, that might be, like, to Tony's point, that might be something we could just check off, get it out of the way. Like, what do we want to ask for? Water was one of them last time. Did we all get that water policy email? You sent that out, right? Amber?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a couple weeks ago, but if you need it again, I can send it.
Okay. And then, any other ones? In the short term, I guess, because we still have a lot to cover, but, all right.
And then going forward, Chair, if you're okay with it, we'd like for this time on the agendas, the future agenda items, if you have anything you want on the agendas in the future, because sometimes we do get emails and it's not up to staff of what we put on there really. If we could bring it and then have the chair and vice chair be like, at least give us direction of what, because we get a lot of stuff from the public, from other staff. We get a lot of information that's like, this should be on there. It's like, that's all great stuff. So if we could bring that to these parts of the agenda so that we can get direction of what we can put on in a timely manner to have time to discuss everything in time.
Yeah, I know sometimes we've been distracted by certain agenda items where we're like, oh, I thought we were going to be talking more about this, but things changed. All right. Anything else on future agenda items? You guys go good. All right. Staff announcements, Amber?
So I know Michael said that he is expecting the last bid to come in for the assessment anytime now. So we'll hopefully bring those to you guys in the next one as well. We still plan on having that done in March, but we may want to discuss having, I know you wanted to talk about community outreach, so we might want to talk about going back to council, not only to give them an update on the grant, but to talk about community outreach as well. So, but I think that's all I have for right now.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, that concludes the meeting. We'll adjourn. And what is 11:23? Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Packed house.
Chair.
Packed house. Thank you.